The bells had not finished their pealing when the doors of the throne room yawned wide like the maw of some ancient beast. Summer's heat weighed on the red keep, thick as wool. The air smelled of old iron, wax, and roses arranged in vases that could not sweeten a hall built around a chair of swords. Eddard Stark paused beneath the shadow of a crimson banner while his leg throbbed against the splints. He refused the cane a servant offered and instead fixed his eyes on the steps that led to the Iron Throne. Steps cut to slow the bold and humble the rash, so he could force his body to remember what honor required when flesh wished to be a coward. On the dais, the boy already sat. Joffrey wore a circlet of pale gold that glinted as though the sun itself had been hammered into a crown. He leaned on one elbow and slouched with the grace only the young believe is kingly. Cersei stood at his right in a gown sewn with emeralds, her hair a banner of Lannister gold. To the left, the king's hand's chair waited empty, the pale hand of office carved in its back like mockery. The court eddied and settled. The small council gathered like carrion birds in the shadow of the high seat. Pycelle nodding and sighing as though the dust were heavy on his bones. Lord Varys placid as water in a windless pond. Peter Baelish smiling with the mild curiosity of a man watching a play whose ending he had written. Janos Slynt loomed near the great doors swarmed by his gold cloaks, his thick lips pressed in an impatient line. Along the walls, the Kingsguard were white pillars. Ser Boros blunt with his folded belly beneath his breastplate. Ser Meryn Trant with the empty eyes of a butcher. Ser Ares Oakheart young and grave. At their heart stood Ser Barristan Selmy, the Lord Commander, white as first snow. His face the map of all the years he had survived and the battles others had not. Sansa had been placed among the ladies close to the dais, eyes wide, posture perfect, fingers clenched white around each other in her lap. Arya stood farther back with Syrio Farrell at her shoulder, as a visiting dancing master, and thus not easily barred. Her face was a knot of suspicion and wonder. The Hound had taken up station below the steps and watched everything as if it were a crude joke only he understood. When Eddard took the first step forward, Barristan moved at the same time and came to stand at his side. He said nothing. He did not offer an arm to steady him. The presence of the old knight was steadier than any cane. It said, without words, the law is not absent here, not altogether. The herald cried out the formalities. Titles filled the heat like buzzing flies. When at last there was silence save for the soft groan of the building itself, Eddard drew a breath that tasted of iron and roses and old dust. "Your Grace," he said to the boy, who grinned and then narrowed his eyes with calculated malice because he had seen men do the same. "I come as Lord Protector, named by your father's hand to serve until the true heir takes his place." Cersei's mouth held a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The true heir sits before you, Lord Stark." "The true heir will be named by law," Eddard said, and lifted the parchment that Robb and Sansa had helped him study line by line the night before, until the wax of Robert's seal seemed to bleed through his dreams. He would not let this devolve to a secret appointment in some dark corridor. He had chosen the bright hall, the eyes of a court, the memory of kings, even if it cost him. By His Majesty's last will, witnessed by Lord Renly Baratheon and others of this council, I am charged to act in his stead. I ask only that the law be heard." Joffrey laughed. "You ask? I command." Cersei reached for the parchment. "This is a children's game. The king is dead. His son wears his crown. We do not need to." Barristan's gauntlet closed gently around her wrist. Not painful, not even unseemly, but as immovable as a stone bridge across a rushing river. The entire room changed its breathing. The hush had a new shape. "Your Grace," the old knight said, and he meant Joffrey because the court had not yet decided to defy the boy's pretense. "The late king's words deserve air. Let the Lord Protector read, and let the realm judge his conduct." Cersei looked at him as though a dog had risen on its hind legs and asked to be seated at the table. The Hound's mouth twisted, and a muscle in his cheek rolled like a horse about to bite. Eddard read. The words were spare and solid as oak. Robert had always been more hammer than chisel, and when he finished, he lifted his gaze to the white-cloaked men. "Ser Barristan, when a king's will names a protector, where stands the Kingsguard? Where we always stand, Selmy answered, voice low but clear. Between the law and any sword raised against it. Cersei folded the parchment neatly as though it had never been torn in some other life and handed it to a servant. So, we've humored the North. Now the boy will be acknowledged. Kneel, Lord Stark, and do your duty. Eddard reached beneath his cloak and brought forth a leather-bound volume. Its spine cracked, pages foxed by hands dead centuries. Varys's eyes lit with the pleasure of a man who found good theater in an unexpected place. Littlefinger's smile did not change at all, which was itself a change. Pycelle peered as though he could force the world back to the version he understood. In this book are lineages of the great houses, Eddard said. Traits that endure from father to son. Black to black, brown to brown, red to red. He laid it atop the steps, a humble thing dwarfed by a mountain of swords behind it. Lord Mauleon wrote it long ago for kings who cared about such matters. Maesters kept it for those who forgot. Is this a lecture? Joffrey drawled, bored and curious at once. Will the next hour be tables and letters? I'll have the master behead you for tedium. Bring them, Eddard said. At his signal the doors opened again. Not the gold cloaks this time, but the city watch's captain of White Sword Tower escort. Men who wore the sigil of the crown without the black of a brothel keeper's purse. Tobo Mott came first, plain in a spotless apron despite the sweat that beaded his brow. Beside him slouched a youth with a black thatch, shoulders too broad for his years, eyes shy and stubborn both. Behind them a woman with a child at her breast walked with the careful pride of those who have already been bowed by life and refused to bow more. There were others too. A baker's son with a shock of coal hair, a cooper's apprentice with the same. The quiet line of Robert's sins drawn in dark strokes across poor faces that would never see a feast in this hall unless they served it. Cersei's laugh thinned to a blade. This is farce. We will not fill the throne room with. Speak again of the men and women of this city as filth, Barristan said, not loud, only full. And you do them less insult than you do your own crown. The words fell like a curtain. It was one thing for a council lord to chastise the queen, another for the white of the Kingsguard to color his voice so plain. The hound snorted. Ser Boros shifted, hand on hilt, then removed it when Ser Barristan did not move to his sword. Ser Meryn's jaw ground. Ser Aerys's eyes flicked to Eddard for the briefest of moments and then to the boy on the throne. Eddard called Tobo Mott, then the youth. This is Gendry. He is apprenticed to the master armorer. Gendry, when Lord Arryn came to your master, what did he ask? Gendry swallowed. His gaze lifted once to the dais and then quickly away. He asked to see the boy with the black hair. He looked at me. He asked about me, Mum. I said I never knew my da. And when Lord Arryn left, Eddard said, flipping the old book open to a page marked in twine. He stopped again at the smithy where a child worked, with black hair and blue eyes. Pretty eyes. The woman with the babe murmured, staring up at the throne as if seeing another man overlaid on the boy. He had those too. Joffrey's lips barely moved. I will have you whipped for this, Stark. Eddard's leg was afire, but something in him had gone cold as ice in a wolfswood stream. He traced the names with a finger. Orys Baratheon, black of hair. His sons, black of hair. Steffan, black of hair. Robert, Renly Stannis, black, black, black. And when Baratheon seed meets Lannister gold, here is what the maesters recorded each time. Black takes, in all branches over and again. Yet the children of the queen are all fair. A curiosity that Lord Arryn died studying. A curiosity that brought him to a brothel where a girl nursed a babe with King Robert's face. Cersei's stillness was not fear but decision, and Eddard knew it. He had known men on ice who grew so still the frost itself seemed a cloak. It meant they would move in one direction only. We have had enough, she said. Janos. Janos Slint had been waiting for that simple syllable. The gold cloaks surged forward with planned eagerness, armor creaking, boots pounding the stone. Their commander's mouth already shaping orders he had been practicing in his mind for days. Eddard prepared himself to be crushed by a choice he had made when he sent a letter to a queen telling her to flee with her children or stand to judgment. He saw the knife's shadow building, the chaos, his daughters swallowed by that chaos. The white cloak moved first. Ser Barristan stepped in front of Eddard and raised his hand high. His sword remained sheathed. His voice rose to the rafters and struck them hard enough to dislodge a sigh of dust. No man lays hand on the Lord Protector while a Kingsguard draws breath. Boros Blunt and Meryn Trant hesitated, half choosing before they dribbled into inaction. Aerys Oakhart took a step toward Joffrey, interposing himself by habit between the boy and danger. The gold cloaks checked, not out of honor but because they were used to reading a fight and this one now had a shape they hadn't anticipated. Janos lowered his chin like a boar about to charge, and in that breath of pause, Barristan spoke again, each word like a stone dropped into still water. "The City Watch keeps the peace," he said, eye on Slint. "Not the crowns purchased by private purses. Any man who draws blood without a command of law will answer for murder." Baelish's smile altered, just the slightest. Varys's lashes fluttered, a silent applause. Pycelle made a strangled sound of protest that might have been his joints. Cersei lifted her chin. "Ser Barristan, I command you. Seize the traitor." The old knight very carefully looked not at her but at the throne, which was not a person but the emblem of all authority that made crowns more than pretty metal. "He will be seized if he is proved false. And if he is not." Joffrey's eyes were hot coins. "I am the king. You will obey." "You are a boy," Arya whispered from a place she should not have spoken, but perhaps no one heard except the gods. Eddard heard. So did the hound. His mouth twitched, and he stared at the child as though she were a small, inconvenient truth. Eddard set his hand on the book, then on his chest. "I will accuse no child to please those who hate me. I will accuse because the realm demands it. Ser Barristan, ask Ser Jaime Lannister whether he fathered these children." A ripple of shock ran the hall. Some laughed as if laughter were armor. Some hissed. Some went silent, the sort of silence that clutches a throat. Jaime was not here. Jaime had left the city in a spray of blood and hoofbeats days ago, after an encounter that had killed men Eddard loved. That absence was argument and indictment both. The hall knew it. Cersei's control broke for an instant and revealed the iron of her. "I will not suffer this. This northern dog howls falsehoods and drags bastards into the hall to bark for him. The Watch will remove him. Now." Janos Slint began his second motion toward violence. He might have carried the day with speed, for numbers are their own argument, but two things happened at once to snare the moment by the throat. The first was that the hound, who served Joffrey but not law, took a single step toward the hand with his sword out. More test than attack to see if anyone would stop him. The second was that Ser Aerys Oakhart, eyes on the child he was sworn to protect, set his hand on Joffrey's shoulder and said, "Lo, your grace, stay seated." Joffrey pushed his hand away. "Do not touch me." Barristan's sword hissed free, not to threaten the king or queen or even the hound. He merely lifted steel between the gold cloaks and the Lord Protector and let the light lie on it. The sight of that sword in the old knight's grasp changed the way every blade in the room felt about itself. Honor is a thing men pretend at until one man touches it, and then it becomes very real indeed. "Ser Janos," Barristan said, his voice suddenly soft, and that softness was worse than any shout. "When I was a squire I watched Prince Aerys name the men who had displeased him and command his guard to take them. I was young. I thought the command was the law because it sounded like one. But that day and many to follow taught me the difference between a king's whim and a king's justice. Do not force me to teach it again in this hall." In the pause, Varys tilted a graceful hand. "If we might be sensible, my lords? Perhaps a test. The law favors tests. The gods do too, or so I am often told." "What test?" Cersei asked, contempt thick as cream. Varys smiled as if to mourn the state of reason. "The boy's hair, the princess's, the prince's. Pull one golden strand and place it beside a black. Let the book be read in case and after case. Bring in those who recall the late king's other children. It will be tedious, yes, but tedium is often what saves us from blood." Littlefinger's voice slipped through as smooth as oiled leather. And while the boy is being compared to bastards, the street will whisper the word cuckold and the word incest, and the city will decide whether it prefers its kings from the bed of a brother. If the queen is so confident, Cersei looked as if she would like to tear out Baelish's tongue with her nails, perhaps for uttering aloud what lived between her and her mirror. But the hall had already changed. It had the smell of a storm, and even fools know that when the wind comes up you lower your head and set your feet. She knew the court was not hers, not for this heartbeat. She wanted to break it, but even lions play at patience when circles of spears surround them. "Do your tedious test," she said, snapping each word clean. "Do it quickly. This charade ends before the moon is up." Eddard signaled once more. Men entered with baskets and bowls. Simple things from the kitchens, ordinary things that insulted no one's eye except those who wanted to find insult. A white-haired septon came with them, and behind him a silent sister to watch not for truth but for appearances. Varys had thought of that, Eddard knew. Varys always thought of that. What followed would never be set to song, because song prefers valor to caution. It was dull and humiliating and precisely what was needed. The septon read from the book. The names rolled, ancient and repetitive. An apprentice plucked hairs from his head and laid them on a white cloth, a coal line that no rhetoric could wash pale. The babe at the woman's breast slept and then woke and then slept again. Gendry stood with arms knotted and jaw clenched and eyes fixed on the floor. Lords fidgeted and ladies whispered and pretended not to whisper, and Joffrey scowled more deeply until the scowl seemed a mask. When Princess Myrcella stepped forward, calm, confused, brave, Barristan took a single golden strand as gently as a man lifting a petal from a flower. He carried it to the cloth and set it beside 3 black ones. Even at a distance, the difference was a shout. There are truths too simple to require eyes to see them. Pycelle's breath rattled. There are anomalies the gods. But he faltered and trailed, his beard trembling like a frightened beast on a chain. "The gods may be invoked at the September," Barristan said. "Here we have oaths and books." Eddard did the thing he had thought of and then put aside twice for want of gentleness. He walked to the woman with the child and lowered his head. "What is his name?" "He had none given by a septon," she replied. "I call him Barra, for his father." Eddard, in front of the throne and all the court, kissed the boy's brow. "No king can make him other than he is, but we can admit it. That is my son's face, too, when he was a babe. The fault is ours, not his." A murmur passed that had the sound of something yielding after pressure. It was not mercy. It was collectively decided reality. Cersei saw it and flinched only in her eyes. She turned to her son. "Stand." Joffrey shot to his feet, full of the thought that height would make him taller. "Enough," he spat. "This is insult. Mother, call the guards." "No," Barristan said. "By the authority in my order's vows, until the rightful heir be named, I place the queen and her children in protective custody of the crown. No man will harm them. No man will let them flee. They will answer the law and be judged, as is any free person." The hound laughed, an ugly wet sound. "Protective custody. That's a neat enough name for a cage." "I have carried cages," Barristan replied without heat. "I know the difference between iron and care." Janos Slint spat on the stones. "Kingsguard speak of law while they forget who pays the city's wages." "Do they pay your honor, too?" Barristan asked, and at last his sword pointed. Not at the man's throat, but just enough into the space between his eyes to remind him that air could be taken. Bit by bit, one by one, the gold cloaks lowered their pikes. A few did not. Those few found themselves ringed by swords that would not be bought. Janos hesitated just 1 second too long and discovered he had fallen out of the future. Men in the room had already mentally replaced him. Bernie, the captain of White Sword Tower Escort, took his arm. "Commander," he said, delicate as lace. "If you please." Janos had never pleased anyone in his life but himself. He tried once to jerk his arm free and found that a man who had crossed the sea 4 times guarding a king had a grip like a vice made by godsmiths. Eddard turned toward the throne. "Joffrey Waters," he said, each word a lash of truth that would leave no welts the eye could see and yet shape a life. By the evidence before this court and the laws of the realm, you are not the son of King Robert Baratheon. You will be treated with the care due your birth as a noblewoman's child. But you are not the king. The boy's mouth worked. I will, when I am my grandfather. You will be safe, Eddard said, aching, and because he could not help himself he let the father in him rise and show in his voice. No harm will come to you that I can prevent. That is my oath. But you will not sit that seat. You think Tywin Lannister will make oaths to you? Cersei narrowed her eyes. There was satisfaction in her voice now, the satisfaction of a new battleground chosen. He does not bend to the north. He will come for me and mine, and he will set your precious book on fire to light his supper. He may come, Eddard said, and the weight of the promise pulled at the old fracture in his leg but steadied his heart. If he comes, he will find the gates shut to treachery and open to justice. The man with the better claim will be invited to take his throne. Stannis? Varys breathed. A pretty sigh folded like a silk fan. How deliciously dull. The realm might be safe, which would disappoint everyone whose clothes are cut from more exciting cloth. Renly will not yield, Littlefinger said, adjusting his glove as if it were more interesting than kingdoms. Nor will the Tyrells. Nor will the West. Nor will. The law is not a man, Eddard said. It does not yield. Barristan lowered his sword. He stood before the court and before the boy and did a thing he had done 3 times in his life and would never learn to do easily. He knelt. Until a rightful king is crowned, I am the shield of the realm. I place this hall, this city, this royal family, and the Lord Protector under my guard. If any man wishes to prove treachery, let him step now, and I will give him steel instead of words. No one stepped. Even the hound only looked at Arya again, frowning as if she were a riddle with no pleasing answer. That day ended in a series of small motions that did not feel like triumph, for triumph is noisy. Cersei and her children were led, not dragged, to a suite in Maegor's Holdfast, which was a fortress within a fortress, but now a sanctuary within a prison within a law. Ser Barristan assigned Ser Aerys to them, because the boy trusted him and because he was young enough to learn and perhaps wise enough to think. Ser Boros and Ser Meryn grumbled at being placed around the holdfast rather than within it, but they obeyed the old man's eyes more than his orders. Janos Slynt was relieved of command until a formal hearing, and a quieter, steadier man named Rickon, who had no powerful friends and no grand ambitions, took charge of the watch with the blunt competence of those who know they will never be sung. The hound stayed with Joffrey. It was decided that to move the boy's dog was to make him bite. Peter Baelish bowed very low to Eddard as the hall cleared and made himself not vanish too quickly, which was itself a vanishing. Varys lingered like perfume in a closed room. Pycelle shuffled out muttering to himself about the weight of crown and the weight of years and how both were heavy and perhaps not rightly placed. When Eddard at last climbed the steps to the chair that waited for him, he sank into it with the feeling of a man lowering himself into cold water after a long march. He looked not at the throne but at the empty spaces in the hall where a mob had not gathered, where blood had not slicked the stones, where his daughter still stood breathing. He allowed himself a single long breath. Then he rose and gave orders. Ravens flew that afternoon, one to Dragonstone for Lord Stannis, bearing official acknowledgement of his claim and an invitation to return and accept regency until a coronation be set. One to Storm's End, because honor required that Renly be told the same thing by the same hand. Others went to Casterly Rock with the news that the queen was safe and in custody and that her children would be treated with all courtesy. As he dictated that letter to Maester Pycelle, Eddard felt Catelyn's hand on his in his memory and Robb's voice arguing for severity. He wrote courtesy anyway, not for Tywin's sake but for his own. Letters to Winterfell and Riverrun, to the Eyrie where Lisa would read and not answer, to the Arbor and to Oldtown, some to inform, some to beg for patience, all to throw webs over a realm that had learned to prefer its spider style of weaving. Late that evening, as the air cooled enough to stop tasting like old pennies, Eddard walked to Maegor's Holdfast with Ser Barristan and 2 guards whose brains he had measured himself. The bridge was shut, the chains down. On the far side, Ser Ares waited with a face composed with more effort than it took to hold a shield. "The queen will not receive you," he said, and then flushed at the idiocy of delivering that line to a man who carried the king's seal. "I did not come to see her," Eddard said. "Only the children." He did not say, "Only to do for them what I would for my own." He did not say, "To see what my choices have wrought." He had learned that some truths collapse when spoken aloud. They found Myrcella and Tommen in a solar littered with game pieces, parchment horses, a cat that thought too highly of its place in the world, and a little so kit with half a rose embroidered and half abandoned. Myrcella stood when Eddard entered. Tommen stared, blue eyes frightened and ready to stop being frightened if someone kindly told them how. "I am Lord Stark," he said, bowing like a courtier because children should see courtesy before they see war. "I have come to assure you of your safety. No man shall hurt you while I live, nor your mother, nor your brother." Myrcella's chin trembled. "Is will he?" "He will be well kept," Eddard said. "He will be angry. It is allowed." Tommen wrung the hem of his shirt. "Mother says you hate us." Eddard crouched, grunting as his leg protested, until he was almost Tommen's height. "I have hate enough for deeds. Men sometimes, never children." Tommen nodded so eagerly his fair hair rioted. "I like cats," he said, because he needed to say something that wasn't about thrones or treacheries. "Ser Pounce sits with me when I feel bad." Eddard smiled in spite of himself and in spite of the room. "That is a loyal knight." Ser Barristan stood at the door, hands behind his back, watching the corridor where danger would come if it came, and in his gaze Eddard saw the calculation of a man who had long believed himself done with such calculations. When Eddard rose, Barristan offered his arm as though he had not earlier refused to steady him and Eddard had not refused the offer that had not been given. The two old men acknowledged the hours in silent increments, as soldiers and fathers and fools. Sansa was waiting for him outside the holdfast, with Septa Mordain hovering like a zealous hawk. She looked at him with her mother's eyes and a stranger's mouth. "Father," she said, voice bright with brittle hope, "I knew you would do the right thing." "Joff," she faltered, proud control slipping. "He will forgive me for this confusion." "He is not. You will be married where love and law meet," Eddard said carefully, hearing how insufficient his words were the instant they left his tongue. "You are not betrothed to him any longer." The words struck her in the face like a hand. She stood very straight. You could see the break travel through her, splinter by splinter, as though she were a tree in winter and ice had found the splits and widened them. She did not weep. She did not run. He both loved and feared that. "Yes, father," she said. "I only wish to be a good lady." Arya appeared as if conjured by the thought of trouble, eyes bright, wooden sword in hand, hair a mess of defiance. "You were very brave today," she said to her father, in the tones of a person giving out prizes. "And the old knight who doesn't look old. He was brave." "Bravery is easier with friends," Eddard said. "Syrio, I am in your debt. Keep your eyes on the corridors. Everything dangerous likes corridors." "Every corridor is a dance," Syrio replied, smiling with his teeth and not his eyes. "If the dance is not to our liking, we step aside." When Eddard slept that night, he dreamed of the gods wood in Winterfell, of snow falling on gray stone and the world quiet and clean. He woke to hammering, not of war but of craftsmen repairing hinges and locks around a queen who had been moved a dozen steps farther from freedom. 1,000 tasks swallowed the day. Appointments and dismissals, postings and postings undone. A quiet reckoning with Janos Slint that ended with a cell and a measured promise of a trial. A meeting with Varys in which the spymaster simpered and smiled and delivered, with his silks rustling like underbrush. A map of where gold had moved in the last fortnight that was more useful than any sword. Toward noon a raven came, black a cut across the blue. It bore Stannis's hand. Curt, hard, full of iron. He wrote that he would come at once, that he would accept the office of protector until his person were in the city, that he would bring his own household guard and expect the city to be held without resorting to ruses. There were no courtesies in the letter, no inquiries after the health of the king. He had not loved. No regrets for a brother. There was only law nailed to the page. Renly's answer was slower. He wrote from Highgarden, where he had just arrived and where he had discovered that the morning sun falls more beautifully over a golden field than over a gray fortress. His letter was witty and bright and said nothing directly. Varys, reading over Eddard's shoulder, sked. He declares nothing, he murmured, which is, as ever, a declaration. Prepare to welcome Lord Stannis, Eddard said, and Barristan nodded once as if the universe had finally remembered how to be sensible. The city held its breath while the sea shivered with sails. Grain carts rumbled in through the Rosby Gate, and the bakers cursed less. Priests of the Seven preached that law and piety were kin after all. The alchemists, feeling slighted, attempted to interest anyone in their new and improved fires and were politely ignored. Sly tongues went busy in taverns. No man did not speak of lions, stags, and wolves. Cersei did not weep. She walked in her cage like a hunter in an unfamiliar forest, leaving marks on bark for later. Joffrey raged. He shattered 2 goblets, cut his hand on a third, and bellowed at a servant so young the boy apologized for bleeding on the floor. Ser Ares bandaged the king's wound with patient hands and spoke of hawking and horses and the colors of sunsets until the boy forgot he was the subject of a kingdom's laughter. The hound sat in the corner and watched and watched some more, as if waiting for the room to confess something. On the 3rd morning after the hearing, Baelish asked for an audience and was given one because Eddard had decided long ago to hear all men even when he had learned the limits of that habit. "You have done a singularly and profitable thing," Littlefinger said cheerfully, crossing one ankle over the other and making himself comfortable without invitation. "You have placed law above advantage. The city will bless you for 5 days and then tire of the taste. Law does not feed them. Advantage, when shared, does. I will feed them with bread taken from honest accounts," Eddard said. "Honest accounts are a quaint legend," Littlefinger replied, "like dragons, or happy marriages. Why are you here, Lord Baelish? To say that you are about to be trapped between a rock and a place much like a rock but older and more stubborn. Tywin will not accept this. He will march. Renly will declare. Stannis will demand obedience. The city will want a parade." He smiled, which to him was what other men did when they prayed. "If you wish to live, put the queen on a ship at night and send her to Casterly Rock. If you wish to be loved, bring Renly here first and give him the crown with a kiss. If you wish to be right, do as you are doing and be prepared to die for it." Eddard looked at him for a long time. "And what do you wish?" "A safe harbor in a storm," Littlefinger said, and rose and bowed. "Send word if you find one." That afternoon the first sails were sighted, black and white against the silver of the bay. The royal fleet rode out to meet them in a gesture that meant welcome or threat depending on the angle of the sun. Eddard went to the ramparts with Barristan. The old knight stood with his hands behind his back, face set, eyes following the gulls because gulls tell you about ships if you learn their language. Davos Seaworth brought the lead galley in. He had honest hands and the look of a man who has counted debts longer than other men count years. He met Eddard not in silk but in plain cloth with salt still in its seams. He bowed to Barristan and called him Ser in a way that warmed stone. "My lord," Davos said, "the king is at Dragonstone this morning and will be here on the morrow if wind holds." "The rightful king," Barristan corrected gently, and watched for the flinch that would tell him what kind of man Davos was. Davos did not flinch. His face eased a measure as men's faces do when their language is finally spoken. "His Grace asks that the queen and her children be protected until he can judge the matter," Davos said. "They are," Eddard answered. "But he should consider judging also those who bought the city watch like horseflesh." Davos's mouth twisted. "He would like to judge everyone. I have told him he cannot. He needs some of them to keep the city from falling into the sea." Eddard liked him. That was worrying. Liking had never improved his decisions before. Lord Stannis Baratheon rode into the city not with trumpets but with order. His escort moved like the numbers in an account that will be audited. He dismounted outside the Red Keep and looked up, not in awe but in calculation. He had a mouth built for disapproval and eyes that had not laughed enough and a jaw that promised he would insist on his way until the bones of the world broke beneath it. He did not embrace Eddard. He did not attempt to. He took the Lord Protector's arm in a clasp that was as friendly as he knew how to be, and then he turned to Ser Barristan and saluted him with the respect a man offers to the position he himself would choose for his rainy days. Lord Stark. A nod.
Ser Barristan.
A nod. We shall have order. I am informed that order began the moment you raised your sword in the hall, Ser. It will continue. It will, Barristan said simply, and there was a moment, quick, the flicker of a candle, where the two men recognized in one another something both feared and valued, the lack of a taste for pretty lies. The hall was filled again that afternoon, not for chaos but for a reading of writs. Stannis took the dais as protector in person until the coronation. He did not sit the Iron Throne because he was a man who knew about symbols and had decided to respect this one precisely to the degree it deserved. He thanked Eddard publicly and briefly. He remade the small council in measured strokes. Pycelle retained in name but with a younger maester installed at his elbow to ensure the business of herbs did not swallow the business of state. Varys kept because Stannis had learned in his long, unhappy life the value of unpleasant instruments. Littlefinger moved from the coins to the busy work of ports, which surely could be fixed by someone who knew so much about ships and money, and Davos given a modest office with a modest influence. Ser Barristan confirmed as Lord Commander by a king who valued merit if not charm. The first test came on the second day of Stannis's arrival, when a courier with Tywin Lannister's colors rode to the city with a letter of acid and gold. Stannis read it in front of Eddard and Barristan, because he enjoyed the act of sharpening truth against insult. The letter declared the Queen's arrest an outrage, demanded her release, and ended with a veiled promise that any further indignities would be met with such correction as the West had always provided for upstarts. Beneath the seal you could smell honey and the long patience of a spider. "We will not release her," Stannis said, and struck through 3 sentences with a knife point as if excising a tumor. "He will come," Barristan warned. "He will burn fields to fuel his march if a path does not open." "Then we will not give him a path," Stannis replied. "We will give him a choice between the long road and the longer." He pushed the letter aside. "I will see the Queen." Cersei wore no emeralds when she received him. She had garbed herself as a widow, which was a joke only to those who had loved Robert, and none of those now in the room had. Not truly. She looked at Stannis with the particular loathing one keeps for an heirloom's claimant. A man who does not admire the object but wants it precisely because it is his. "So," she said, "Robert's little brother plays at justice." "Justice is not play," Stannis said. "You are under the Crown's guard. You will be treated well. Your son will not be harmed. If you have counsel to offer about your father's intentions, I will hear it." "My father intends that you die," Cersei said pleasantly. "He intends the city to learn its place again and for those who defamed his daughter to pay. He will lift me up before the gates and ask the crowd what they think of wolves and stags." Stannis regarded her as if she were a puzzle with a missing piece. "He cannot unweave what is woven. I am the king. You are a little man with a large chair waiting for him," she replied. The city loved Renly. The realm loved Robert's smile. "What does it love in you? Account books? Closed gates?" She smiled. "You are a king for winter. Men will remember you when they are cold and want a fire under the law to warm themselves." Stannis's jaw barely moved. "They will remember that you are confined, lady." He turned and left as if walking away from an equation whose result had not pleased him but was still true. Outside, he found Eddard and Barristan waiting as a mountain waits for weather. "The trial will be held," Stannis said, "in 3 weeks. By then the West will have sent either swords or words. Either will be answer." Renly declared himself 3 days later, in the torchlight splendor of a high garden feast where roses fell like summer rain and lords laughed in the fragrant air. Word came wrapped in silks and scented with fruits that did not grow within 50 leagues of the city. He named himself king for love of the realm and respect for the people, and there was a great deal of fondness for him because he smiled and did not talk about book law. The Tyrells smiled with him, a family flower with too many petals to count. "Renly will be loved," Varys said dreamily. "That is not nothing. Love will cross rivers that law refuses to wade." "Law can build a bridge," Stannis said. "Love cannot hammer iron." "Love can at least find men to carry it," Varys murmured, then put his finger to his lips as if someone had told him a secret in his own head. Eddard watched the lines sharpen. He sent another series of ravens, one to Riverrun urging Hoster Tully to hold his men and not answer west with fire, one to the Eyrie begging Lisa to release her fear and the boy who had become its cage. He considered writing to Tywin again and did. He used the words honor and courtesy once more as if they had not yet been spent. In the north, Robb paced Winterfell's cold halls and wanted to set the world running to match his blood. Catelyn prayed by a weirwood that had no face and thought of a husband who had made a choice that might keep his head and cost him other quiet things. The Riverlands bled, because Gregor Clegane was not restrained by the subtleties of city decisions, and he had been told to do harm until harm made a shape that suited his lord. Eddard sent men, small companies at first and then larger, to shield villages and pull farmers away from roads that had become veins for raiding. He wished to ride himself. Barristan told him he would be a fool. They settled on sending men Eddard trusted and making sure a Stark hand touched every order so that the North understood its lord had not become a figurehead at a southern desk. Davos brought quiet counsel like bread that had not been requested but eaten gratefully. He spoke of ships, of the narrow sea, of whispers from the stepstones. He spoke less of a red woman and more of the fire she tended, and when Eddard at last asked, Stannis said flat, "She is an advisor with a god I do not understand. She tells me I am chosen and I tell her to show me where the food is buried. We come to an accommodation." "She burns," Barristan said, his mouth as thin as a strung bow. "She does," Stannis admitted, and studied the older man's face as if taking a measure he had needed in his quiver. "I will not burn this city. That is my oath now, to its hand and to its guard. When oath meets prophecy, I choose oath. I am stubborn that way. You are," Barristan said, and the smallest ghost of a smile troubled his hard mouth. Renly gathered a great host across the south. Knights bright as pictures and boys eager to be painted filled his camps. Loras Tyrell's rose-bedecked banners made fields look like bridal beds. He sent envoys to the city with honeyed words and invitations to reason. Eddard met them in a chamber with plain walls and no gilt at all. "My lord offers you a crown for a safe handover," a merry-tongued man said. "He will even make a place for Lord Stannis at his table. Such is his love." "Stannis has a table," Eddard answered. "It is not Renly's to offer." The envoy laughed and then saw that no one else did and let the laugh unbecome him. "Then he will come nearer. He will still speak of love, only louder." He came nearer. He camped near Storm's End and sang and danced and made the air smell of trampled flowers. Stannis sent him one letter warning him to stand down and another saying please. The second contained no please at all, but Eddard saw it in the white spaces between words. The realm shuddered and waited for the brothers to smash against each other like stags in rut. On a night with no moon, heavy as velvet pulled over a face, a man in a gray cloak rowed a skiff into Renly's harbor. No sentry saw him until he wished to be seen. He walked into a tent where cousins plotted marriages and favorites gossiped, and he slid it open from side to side like a belly. He left nothing behind, only cold and a breath that smelled of deep caves. In the morning Renly lay in his bed with a look of surprise on his mouth and his chest opened from left to right by a wound as neat as a line drawn with a steel pen. Loras Tyrell screamed, and half the South decided to forget love, which is a fragile thing when it meets grief. Rumor ran like a hare. Some said a shadow did it. Some said a ghost. Some said a man no one had seen twice. Eddard did not know. He asked Davos, who did not answer with words and whose face made Eddard hope he would never learn. Stannis took no joy. He gathered Renly's lords who would bend and let the others go. The Tyrells bent in a shape that looked like courtesy and had the hard underside of threat. They withdrew to think. Stannis marched toward the city with men who loved order and some who feared it. Tywin moved, too. He bled the Riverlands and brought his army east in a line of dust and iron. He did not hurry. He had all his life learned the art of arriving late with inevitability. He wrote Eddard again, colder this time, promising that if a hair on his daughter's head were harmed, he would burn every tree from the Blackwater to the Rush and feed his horses on the ashes. No hair was harmed. Eddard made sure of that. He visited Cersei once more before the trial and found a woman arming herself with calm. "Do not mistake me," she said. "I would kill you if it served. But this way is better. It will be seen that you stabbed me with a book. Some will say it is cleaner. It does not feel so." "Nothing feels clean," Eddard said. "Not war, not peace, not choosing, not refusing to choose. We make ourselves clean if we can. The rest is dirt that comes and goes." She studied him as one might a new carving, suspicious of its symmetry. "Do you think if Robert had loved law the way you do, we would be here? If Robert had loved anything that was not himself, we might be elsewhere," Eddard said, and was a little surprised to hear bitterness in his voice because he had always preferred to keep that spice for private. The trial assembled in the great September of Baelor, because Stannis would please the Seven once if he must, and because the gods, like the law, enjoy being courted in public. High lords sat and whispered behind their hands. Small folk pressed against pillars hoping for spectacle. Cersei stood straight and said nothing. Joffrey was not brought, because Stannis had declared he would not make a carnival of children. Testimony unfurled. The book was read again like a litany. Tobo Mott spoke. The seamstress spoke. Gendry stammered. Eddard spoke and refused to look at Stannis while he did so, because he did not wish to be steadied by a man's disapproval. Varys said gentle nothings that were every one of them a small shove toward a conclusion. Pycelle spoke until someone started to sigh loudly every time he opened his mouth, and then he spoke less. When it ended, the judges, Stannis, the High Septon, and 3 lords chosen by lot to preserve the appearance of impartiality, retired and returned. The verdict was written on their faces before the High Septon found the bit of paper he used to remind himself what the gods wished him to say. He declared the children false-born. He declared that they would be given places suited to their station but never thrones. He declared that the queen had committed sin and crime and would be confined, not killed, until such time as the king determined mercy or justice. He struggled with the last words like a man dragging a heavy pail up too many steps. He had hoped to say burning, Eddard thought. He did not. Joffrey howled when told. He struck Ser Ares once, twice, and then stopped because the knight's face, after the second slap, looked like what a father shows a son when the boy has stumbled. Patience and regret and a limit approaching. Tywin quickened his pace. His letters lost even the politeness of threat. The West marched as if it wished to push the continent into the sea and slide into the water after it. The river lords braced at last, because people not subject to trial still answer to fire. Robb took the green road south with gray wind shearing the air at his side. Catelyn went with him because she would not be left to wait in a hall while her son chose the steps away from boyhood. They came not to break the city but to bar Tywin's way to it. The careful dance that Eddard had been leading with Stannis and Law met the thud of hooves and the clash of men who had been promised something and meant to collect. The battle by the Rush began under clouds and ended beneath stars that hid their faces. Eddard was not there, which tasted worse than any failure he had ever known. He waited on the battlements, with Ser Barristan at his side, and watched the southern horizon redden. The city was quiet. Fear keeps people indoors, and the air was damp with the river's breath, and all the gods felt far off. Davos, who did not fight but counted, stood with them and murmured prayers to a god he did not confess to believing in, because men pray to any listening ear when they cannot affect the matter themselves. A rider came after midnight, then another, then 3, messages like stones thrown into a pond, making circles that met and crossed and finally produced a picture. Robb had crossed late and hit hard. Tywin had expected more fear and found more wolf. The lines bent like green reeds and then held. The Riverlord's banners, tattered from long days of running, had found stiff ground and refused to let the West pass. The night was full of screaming, which is not news in war. The morning found both armies staring at each other across a muddy wound and choosing to bleed again another day. Tywin pulled back, not in defeat but in the reluctant admission that the city would not fall to him while the North made a wall out of sons. Renly's men, those who had bent, joined Stannis under tolerable terms, and the number of banners in the crown's yard began to look like the counting boards Stannis loved. The Tyrells still hovered at a distance, as if considering which way the wind smelled least like smoke. Sansa asked nightly about songs and whether there would be a marriage for her that did not taste of ashes. Arya asked whether there would be more lessons with wooden swords that could accidentally find real throats, and Syrio made sure they did not. The Hound came to Eddard once, unexpected. He smelt of horse and dog and something that might have been regret if men like him ever allowed themselves the scent. "The boy will try to kill you," he said, as if discussing the weather. "He is a boy," Eddard replied. "That's why," the Hound said and left, and after he had gone Eddard found his hands shaking. Not from fear. From the way truth sometimes comes on 4 ugly legs and sits by the fire as if invited. Joffrey tried nothing that week. He glowered and swore and flung plates and once spent an hour throwing apples out a window because he liked the sound of them hitting the stones. Ser Ares watched and endured, and the Hound drank and watched, and the city settled into the uneasy pattern that people call peace because it does not include screaming in the night. The wall still stood. Letters came from the far north like birds with frost on their wings. Jon Snow wrote twice to a father who was also now the hand of a king who was not a brother of Jon's in any line of any book. Jon wrote about the cold and the trees and a thing in his chest that felt like a learning he had not chosen. Eddard answered as he could. He told the boy he loved him without making a show of it, and he told him that honor sometimes requires survival first. He told him to listen to Jeor Mormont and to his own eyes and to the wind. He told him the rest would be waiting when the snows allowed it. Stannis was crowned in the great September after the Tyrells, in a moment of calculation that resembled grace, offered the roses of the Reach for the purpose of garlands. He wore no jewels beyond the crown and looked as comfortable in it as a man looks when shouldering a harness that will let his horse pull but chafe the skin raw in time. He said the words, those words that never stop being just words until someone drops blood on them, and the city shouted because shouting is cheaper than contentment. He kissed Shireen on the brow without smiling, and the queen, solemn and distant as a winter star, stood at his right. The Red Woman watched from the back, eyes like coals covered in a thin layer of ash. After the feast, which was notable for its lack of drunkenness and the fact that everyone had enough to eat, Stannis called Eddard and Barristan to a quiet chamber and closed the door like a man shutting a box. He looked at them both for a long moment as if they were devices he was considering buying. "I will have order," he said. "You will help me make it. The Lannisters will be beaten back. The Tyrells will be bound or obstructed. The North will be honored. The Riverlands protected. The Vale coaxed out of its tower. I will tax the city for what it spends and spend only what it brings in, not 1 copper more. I will burn no man for his prayers. I will break no vow that holds this realm together. And when winter comes, because it will, we will give it a fight." "A fight," Barristan said, tasting the word like wine he had not expected to enjoy. "Not a sacrifice." "Not a sacrifice," Stannis agreed. He looked at Eddard. "Will you continue as hand?" Eddard's aches answered before he did. They said, "You are tired, you are stubborn, you long for quiet woods and your son's laughter." He said, "I will." They went out into the city and found it brighter than it had been in weeks, because people, even those for whom law is a foreign tongue, like to believe that things can settle. And for a time they did. The West pulled back to its own borders and snarled from safety. Robb returned to Riverrun with flocking birds of rumor circling his head. The Ironborn sniffed the air like dogs considering whether to bark. The narrow sea sent ships that brought olive oil and stories and a strange perfume that made the whole of Flea Bottom smell briefly of citrus and hope. There were still knives. There always are. A boy with bright hair tried to slip out in a baker's cart and was caught by a guard who did not love him. A woman in a river of silk bribed a servant to let her into the holdfast for a kiss to a false king. When she was found, she insisted she had been visiting her sister, which she did not have. Janos Slint stood trial and learned the limits of his usefulness. Littlefinger stopped coming to court and began to lay foundations elsewhere, in a city he would never rule and with allies he would never trust. Varys sent word that across the sea a child of a dead dynasty had been found with a crown in her eyes. Stannis nodded as if told of a small fire that would someday need a bucket. Eddard went sometimes to the godswood that had been planted as a polite concession to northern lords and found it too orderly. He missed the ice and the smell of pine and the way the wind whined against stones. He stood, nonetheless, with his head bowed and said the words that do not change. Arya came once and stood beside him and did not speak until she had decided he would do it wrong without her. "You have to listen," she said. "The leaves always try to say something." "What do they say?" Eddard asked. "Not yet," Arya replied, which might have been insolence if it had not sounded so much like faith. Ser Barristan one night came upon the Hound in a guard tower, sober for once, staring at the piles of wood stacked for winter in a city that had no right to think of winter yet. The old knight stood next to him. "You are waiting," he said. "For the day when it all goes wrong," the Hound replied. "It may not," Barristan said. The Hound barked, a laugh with all the mirth drowned. "You've lived too long to say that." "I have," Barristan admitted. He laid his hand on the stone and felt the old fortress's heartbeat. "But I have also lived long enough to know that sometimes the right men arrive at the right time, and sometimes the wrong ones are restrained by the right circumstances. You and I will never be right, Sandor. But we can stand on a wall and choose not to fall off it." The Hound considered him, head cocked like a dog hearing a whistle. "You did a thing in that hall," he said. "I've seen men talk up their courage after. They always say they would do it again. I never believe them. I think I might believe you." Barristan's mouth made a shape dangerously close to a smile. "I will have fewer chances left to prove it. But I hope to not need many." When winter's first messenger came in the form of an early frost that pitted the morning in silver, the city lifted its face to it and let out a soft, collective sound. It was not fear. Men are always, somehow, surprised that seasons obey only themselves. Eddard wore fur for the first time in months and felt half foolish and half himself. The raven, when it arrived, brought news that men had seen dead things that walked. It was written in the crabbed hand of Maester Aemon, and the ink shook as if cold had gotten into it. Eddard took the message to Stannis. He took it to Barristan. He took it to the small council and the large table and the wide city. He said, "This is a war you do not sing about." He said, "This is a thing beyond our old games." He said, with the quiet of a man who had once heard the wind in the leaves and believed it, that the law could make bridges not only over men's greed but over fear, and that those bridges would be needed. Stannis listened the way he listened to everything, as though the world had slid half a league out of true and only a ledger could measure it back. "We will send men," he said. "We will send food. We will send fire. We will still hold the West at bay. We will still hold the realm together. We will not be distracted by phantoms, but we will not pretend they are phantoms either." Barristan set his palm on the table so that the grain of the wood pressed an honest pattern into his skin. "I am old," he said. "I have carried steel into fires of every color and name. I thought the last fight would be for a crown. Perhaps it will be for dawn itself. I will stand where I am placed." Eddard looked at the two men and found himself, absurdly, grateful to be placed among them. He had thought leadership a matter of holding one's head higher than others. He knew now it was a matter of bending it when needed, of holding doors open, of keeping cages from becoming pyres, of keeping children's beds safe even when the law had pushed them off the path they'd thought theirs. He went that evening to Maegor's Holdfast, not to see the queen but to stand where he could hear the children's laughter through the windows. Myrcella was telling Tommen a tale about a cat who fought a dragon and lost, and was pleased to have lost, because now it had a friend whose breath kept it warm in winter. Joffrey's voice did not join them. He was elsewhere, breaking something that would be mended before morning. Eddard stood with Ser Aerys for a while and said nothing. The young knight spoke of hawks and dogs because he had discovered they are, in the end, similar things. When he went back across the bridge, the city spread beneath him was a mat of orange and black, torches and their shadows. He thought of Winterfell, which was a pattern of white and gray. He thought of the wall, which would be frost blue and iron dark and older than all of them. He thought of a throne made of swords and a book full of names and a boy whose hair had betrayed a lie, and an old knight lifting a blade not to strike but to stay a tide. There were worse ways to spend a life than holding a door against the wind. There were worse ends. He would not choose them. Days lengthened and then shortened as days do, stubbornly uninterested in the designs of men. Tywin Lannister did not attack again that autumn. He sent trade caravans instead, as if to sneer that he could buy what he would not take by force and sell it back at a profit. The Tyrells introduced a variety of pear that made ladies sigh and small children sticky. Davos found a man in the docks who made fine sturdy shoes and told him the king liked them. The man's fortunes rose and he named his third son after his patron and did not know whether to be grateful or frightened about it. Varys whispered of faraway storms and dragons that were, perhaps, no longer a metaphor. Baelish was seen in the Vale and the Riverlands, at suppers where young lords laughed too loudly and older ones smiled too little. The queen learned a serenity that infuriated those who wished her to be loud. She held her head high when she walked the edge of her small permitted garden. She smiled for Tommen and taught Myrcella a stitch that made roses even out of coarse wool. When she looked toward the city, she did not look at the throne but at the sea, which belongs to no man and never comes when called. Joffrey grew into his anger until it fit him. The Hound kept him alive by winning fights he did not have to fight. Ser Ares learned to be the kind of wall that looks like a door to a child. Sansa learned to smile when she did not wish to. She learned to curtsy without bending too low. She learned to speak to ladies with daughters and sons and to hear in the talk about winter cloaks the bargains that would hold a kingdom together when men forgot the worth of bread. Arya learned to move sideways when a blow came from the front. She learned that wooden swords bruise and steel remembers. She learned to say the prayers of 3 gods in 3 ways and to mean none of them fully and all of them enough to keep walking. Ser Barristan rode often along the walls at dawn. He liked the way the city smelled then, clean as it ever would. He trained in the yard with men 20 years younger and 20 times as sure of themselves, and the sound of his steel rang true than theirs because he had plans for it that did not include how it would look in reflection. He sat with Lord Eddard sometimes in quiet and spoke of the battles they had not fought, which are always the worst ones if you ask men who have fought too many. Winter crept nearer, a slow, patient thief. When snow fell in King's Landing for the first time in a decade, it came as hard crystals that cracked underfoot rather than soft flakes. Small folk came outside to let it sting their faces and to tell each other the world had turned. The Red Keep looked briefly clean. Children tried to pack balls with their hands and yelped and laughed and tried again. The city breathed cloud for an hour and then lightened as the snow melted, and most men pretended it had meant nothing. Up at the wall, Jon Snow wrote a 3rd letter that Eddard would read by firelight and fold carefully. He wrote of cold that had weight, of ghost-silent nights, of eyes in the trees. He wrote of a commander who had given him a sword and a duty, and of a wildling girl who had laughed at him for saying there were rightful kings. He wrote that the North felt like a story told by a dead ant and that he was, sometimes, afraid. Eddard traced the words with his thumb and did not weep because he knew now that his tears were best saved for those who had no more use of any human eye. In early spring, a raven came telling of faces seen in the ice that were not faces. Stannis ordered more men north. Tywin ordered more wheat west. The Tyrells proposed a marriage that would bind the crown to their bread and roses, with a girl as pretty as spring drowning in her own hair. Sansa learned to enjoy tea without sugar. Arya learned to throw a knife and not to throw it if she could help it. The Queen learned to play Syvas from a guard who had a gift for strategy and never bragged. The Hound learned that a certain brown-red cat had decided he was its new chair, and that once a cat decides, no arguments matter. The trial had not ended anything. They never do. It had begun a slow work that is less dramatic than fire and far more durable. Men learn to live with truth even when they hate it, because there are rents to be paid and children to be fed and roads to be walked. The city, which had been balanced on a knife, found its weight settled, uneasy, shifting, never quite safe, but not forever slicing itself. One night Eddard dreamed again of the godswood. He dreamed of snow in his hair and the sound it made when it slid off branches and splashed onto stone. He dreamed of a voice that might have been the wind saying not yet, and when he woke he knew he would live to see a winter real and not merely metaphor. He also knew that the law he had kept alive in a hot, ugly hall with a book and a choice would be needed more, not less, as men grew cold. He rose in the dark and walked to the window. The city slept. The sea made its constant, insolent conversation with the land. Somewhere a child cried and was comforted. Somewhere a man who hated him heightened his hate by turning it over in his hands like a coin. Somewhere an old knight lay awake and stared at the ceiling and thought of the past as a thing that had stopped being useful. Eddard put a hand to the stone. It was cool. He thought of Robert's laughter, of Cersei's green dress like the idea of envy made cloth, of Joffrey's mouth forming the first syllable of an order that had not found air to reach. He thought of a boy named Gendry whose muscles would make metal obedient and of a woman who had named her child Bara as if names could protect. He thought of his own children and the way their faces were a map he could read across any distance. In the morning he went with Ser Barristan to the training yard to watch boys hit each other with wood to keep them from later hitting each other with steel. He put a hand on the old knight's arm as two pages crashed together. "Thank you," he said. Barristan grunted, which in his vocabulary was gratitude returned, and I would do it again, and we are not finished all at once. They stood in the sun that had finally remembered its job and they watched, and sometimes that is a better duty than any more violent one. When the shadows stretched long, when the yard smelled of sweat and satisfaction, when the boys' laughter had turned from sharp to loose, they returned to the work of holding a realm together with oaths and paperwork and the occasional sword. A letter waited on the hand's desk. It was sealed with blue wax and bore an unfamiliar sigil. A three-headed dragon that had not been seen stamped true in many years. Eddard broke it. He read. He felt the floor make that subtle shift that happens when something large has moved a long way away and the effect finally reaches you. He took the letter to Stannis. He took it to Ser Barristan. He took it, eventually, to the window and held it up to the light. The sea did not look different for all that a name had blown like a spark over water. He thought of the court where he had stood with a book and an old knight and a room full of people who wanted anything but tedium. He thought of the way the book had felt under his hand. Not exciting, not sharp, not noble, heavy and stubborn and resistant to fire. He thought, the next time a book will not do. He thought, perhaps nothing will do except the thing we are already doing, building a bridge across the ice and hoping it holds when weight comes. That night he sat with Arya and Sansa before a small fire. He watched Arya's hands when she spoke. He watched Sansa's mouth when she didn't. He told them a story about a man in the north who had once tried to talk a wolf out of being a wolf and had succeeded only by becoming more himself than he had thought possible. They did not understand it. They will, he thought. They will. He kissed their hair, one dark and wild, one red and careful. He stood and went to write more letters, and he felt no triumph and no despair, only a steady, enduring thing like the beat of his own heart. In all the long sagas of men and their metals, there come moments when someone takes a step that is not brave in the way songs think, not brilliant in the way clever men prize, not profitable in any market. It is simply correct. It holds. It waits. It saves. In the end, the city would have its fires and its feast days, its riots and its quiet. In the end, the West would come again and be resisted again, and the South would smile and the North would stiffen and the sea would do as it pleased. In the end, winter would arrive and prove that it had ignored every raven and laugh used to deny it. In the end, a boy with black hair would raise a hammer in a forge, and a woman with a child would teach him to count by coppers, and a queen would say a prayer over a son she both loved and had made monstrous, and an old knight would lift a sword one more time and thank whatever gods he had ever known for the weight of it. But before that and after that, there was a hall full of air and a book full of names and a white cloak's blade lifting not to cut but to keep. There was a woman's anger and a boy's howl and a city's choice to let truth sit for a while in a chair that had thrown off stronger men before. There was a man from the north, leg aching, back straight, voice steady, saying law, law, law as though it were the only music he had been taught, and he refused to learn a more fashionable tune. The bells did not ring for that moment, but they had rung earlier, and they would ring again, and the sound of them would find its way through years and into the corners where memory keeps its careful hoards. Somewhere a maester would write in crabbed script that on a certain day in a hot, bright hall, a boy was told he could not be a king, and an old knight's sword made noise enough to keep men from choosing blood. Somewhere a singer would try and fail to make it into a lay because lays require endings. Somewhere a woman would smile to herself in a small chamber and know that whatever tools she had lost, she still had herself and could wield it. And in the red keep's quiet hours, when the wind slipped through stone like a rumor and the torches hissed and the city beneath breathed in and out, Eddard Stark would sometimes remember how the weight of the book had felt, and how the old knight's voice had sounded, and think, if this is the shape of our courage, it will be enough. If it is not, we will make more. He would set his seal to a letter or to a law. He would stand. He would hold. And beyond him, beyond all of them, the long night would prepare its arguments, convinced still that some truths must be retaught in cold and in darkness. That, too, would be a court and someone would need to speak.